How long is that?
Ahoy! It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Ron again. This is actually the 5th time he's been speaking to us. He is a font of knowledge. Ron is a longtime member of the National Yacht Club. His father, Al, past purser of shellbacks, Class A dinghy sailor, and was an active keelboat owner. And his grandfather, Herb, who ran the National Yacht Club and was an active keelboat sailor, carries the Jenkins name well back in National Yacht Club history. Herb had a wonderful style to deal with all kinds of difficult matters.
His grandfather,
he dealt with it with a deft touch, and so it continues in the family. Ron is an active nature and sailing photographer. When hobbies don't interfere, he works in technology marketing. In the technological area, Ron is our webmaster. He weekly records the sessions and uploads them to our web, in addition to loading our schedule and any other pertinent information. He's an active participant in Waterfront for All, a coalition of groups protecting the Toronto waterfront. Today he will give us a bit of history of the waterfront and the cyclone that was used to make the changes. By the way, I just mentioned that this is the 5th time speaking. He will have time at the end for questions. Please give Ron another warm shellback welcome.
So I'm happy to see so many of you here today, coming through the rain. Not to misrepresent the topic, the cyclone is no meteorological cyclone. It's that dredge that you see in the picture there, called the cyclone. You can imagine a cyclone, but this one changed the waterfront perhaps more than any cyclone could. What I'll do, I have more material than we can possibly get through today. So what I think would be good is interrupt me with questions as I go, and that way you'll get your questions in. And if we stop early, we stop early. The Toronto Harbour went through a major alteration at the beginning of the 20th century. 1914, 1918 here shows the Harbour Commission's plan for expansion. And a lot of that involved lake filling, as you might see. In particular, they wanted to expand the central waterfront here, and also the portlands. But they also made additions into the Toronto Islands as well. And that's another one of their visioning exercises at the time. But the story starts back much further with Fort York and Garrison Creek, because I'm sort of going to be focused a bit more on the Western Gap area for probably most of this. This is Toronto Harbour and the approach to Toronto Harbour as it existed in 1813. And what you can see here actually is a battle. These are the Americans. And the fort in the center there is Fort York. This is the only entranceway into the harbor at the time. And it was guarded by Fort York and also by a single cannon blockhouse here on a sandbar. There was no Eastern Gap. What also you can see over on the far right here is the lighthouse that still stands on the island today. but it was a very narrow and shallow passageway into the harbor. And that passageway, the entrance really was down here in the corner of this map, which was Queen's Wharf, built a little later after the fort. So there's the fort showing there, and this is Queen's Wharf here. And it changed shape over the years, but it really was right near the mouth of Garrison Creek. You won't be able to see Garrison Creek today. It's all underground. But if you look at Niagara Street, even today, it follows the path of Garrison Creek. Other things to notice over here was something called the New Garrison, which was intended to eventually replace Fort York. They called that the Old Fort. One other little detail, a couple of other little details on this map that I think are interesting. One is called Zosky Wharf. That's named not after Peter, but Casimir, his grandfather, who was a major engineering force along the waterfront. And in fact, today there's a little street called Zosky Wharf Street or something. It's just built north of Coronation Park. I guess the last thing there you might want to see is the Lunatic Asylum Waterworks right here. Yeah, the Lunatic Asylum was up here. The Provincial Lunatic Asylum.
Commonly known as 999 Queen.
999 Queen. And at the time, it was right on the outskirts of the city. I think maybe Americans planning on invading the city would have looked at that and said, wow, that's a pretty large asylum. I don't know if we want that place. This is what Garrison Creek looks like today. It's in an 1880s culvert. A little bit later, the Queen's Wharf was expanded, widened, in fact. Here, numerous other wharfs were built along the waterfront, especially between what's now the Western Gap area and the Don. And this is the 1893, I believe. One thing you would notice down here in the corner is National Yacht Club, which had been moved there from the other side a couple of years before. Fort York, to give you an orientation, when you have a clear view there, you see it used to look across water, but there's tip-top tailors under construction about 1929. So that Queen's Wharf had actually more than one lighthouse, but this is an early sketch of the harbor entrance at the time, and one of the lighthouses that was there. This is much later. This is near to the end of the 19th century, and you may recognize that building. It's on at Fleet Street, just sort of outside, a little bit outside the exhibition grounds. This was the harbor master's house here, and this was the Queen's Wharf, forming like a T-junction at the end. So ships entering the harbor would just be passing right by that wharf. That's another view of the same thing. And this is a view actually from inside the harbor, looking at the back side of that lighthouse. The National Yacht Club would be just out of the picture to the left. So those are probably some early National Yacht Club boats. That's probably around 1908. Not long after that, the problems with the harbor entrance became insurmountable, and the problems were particularly that the bottom was very shallow, And at the end of Queen's Wharf, it was really only about 10 feet deep. And they couldn't dredge it much deeper because of bedrock there. So the Harbour Commission decided to fill in, as you can see here, fill in the whole western gap essentially and build a new one. So there's the harbour master's house. Everything in front of it now is lake fill. There's the lighthouse sitting there still, land bound. And that same lake filling, this is a view from the lighthouse looking to the west. And before long, there was no water in front of that old Queen's Wharf at all. But the lighthouse and the lighthouse keeper's house remained. Here's a little bit later. Now there's a Lakeshore Boulevard running in front of the lighthouse keeper's house and the lighthouse. And this is a view from the lighthouse. Now you're looking southwest, across Lakeshore Boulevard, and down this way is the National Yacht Club that you might remember from as late as 1985, 86. So you can see how far away from the water things had moved. And here's another view from a little bit north of that lighthouse, looking across past the lighthouse to past the Maple Leaf Stadium that was built there in 1926. And there's the National Yacht Club again. And one other little item of interest to me, at least, is right out here. That thing is the outer range light of the Western Gap. And you might recognize it, but you might not. It's still there today. Yes?
Is that the AYC, right where you are?
I don't know if it was AYC at the time. It might have been. I'm not sure exactly when AYC moved there, but sometime around then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Down here at the bottom, this is probably a fairly familiar view if you're in the Bathurst and Lakeshore intersection, that gas station, and across the street are the condos. The one on the right is that one that has the soldiers, the toy soldier statue right in front, marking obviously the Fort York area. But that same gas station was there in the early 20s and late 20s here. And what you can see in the background across Lakeshore Boulevard is, again, that lighthouse and the lighthouse keeper's house right there. That gives you an idea where that lighthouse was when you look here at the modern waterfront. Call it waterfront usually. 1929, they decided that they liked the old lighthouse enough to preserve it, which was a surprising thing to do in the 1920s. So they moved it westward to its current location there on Fleet Street. You can see it dragged it with horses. And they tore down the old, what's called Harbour Master's house, actually. He was a lighthouse keeper as well. And then they built a loop around it on the streetcar line. By now you can see Tip Top Taylor's building has been built there as well, at the corner of Lakeshore Boulevard and Stadium Road. And just over in the corner off the edge of the picture is, again, the National Yacht Club. When that Fort York condo was being built, and then going back just a little bit earlier, this was 2003, they were excavating here, so there's the foundation opening up. You can see the streetcars here. And that's the Loblaw building there, Loblaw's, and this is the Cross and Blackwell building. But as they were excavating in here, they were digging up the crib work of the Queen's Wharf that had been buried about 100 years before. And this sort of gives you an orientation. Queen's Wharf grew in length over the years, but it started out right up near Fort York here and ended up, you see, close to Bathurst and Lakeshore. The crib work that's exposed in that last picture is that right there, marked number 5. There was some more exposed here, and then this area right here is where the Loblaws building was. They tore it down, building a condo and recladding the outside with the facade of the old Loblaws building. A little later, just up Bathurst Street a little bit, they started excavating for another condo and dug up more wharf. This is something that actually is not an unusual thing along the Toronto waterfront, because when they expanded with lake filling, they just dumped fill on top of whatever was there. This one got a little bit of interest. This was in 2015. It got some interest because they also found the remains of an old schooner in the fill. So that guy is just poking around. You can see a bit of the keel or kelson right in here.
Did they preserve any of it?
Yes, they did. They actually took it over to Fort York and did a little bit of study on it. They were able to date up to a point because they found a coin. I think the coin was an 1832 coin that was in the mast step. You know that tradition?
They did this, they did find a ship, but when they were excavating what eventually became the building that my dad lives in now at the foot of Church and the Esplanade.
Yes.
They went down and it was just water and a whole pier. It was just as if nothing had ever happened.
Yeah.
Because there was still water there, which
All
was
that
kind of
stuff's
scary.
preserved. Yeah, the wood was, a lot of the wood is quite well preserved in these old footings and crib work. And the reason, and sometimes they've actually used it for furniture and there's some good on that. Yes,
I'm
I'll.
on the mooring committee of the National, and every once in a while, you get a bunch of the old cribs floating on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
It's, really big, heavy stuff.
Yes, that probably is not crib work from the Queen's Wharf.
The
Would
thing
be.
is from the seawall.
Yes, yes, the seawall might be coming up. That's just another view of the same thing. There's a bit of an orientation there. So it's Fort York Boulevard on the north side and Bathurst Street at the running north-south there. And you can see the crib work is actually quite extensive. This is going back again in time to an earlier view of the waterfront. This is typical of these 19th century depictions of the Toronto waterfront. It was busy. There were a lot of grain elevators and there was a lot of freight traffic running along, all the way along the waterfront and out onto the wharves as well. So you have train lines all the way along here. That's the old Union Station there. And this is, I think, the northern freight, oops. I don't know how I did that with a laser pointer. Anyway, that's the northern grain elevator. There were numerous grain elevators. Oh, they were all wooden at the time. They had a tendency to burn down or explode.
So, excuse me, with the grain elevators, where did the grain go? From Toronto, where did the grain go by ship?
It was arriving to Toronto to be used there.
Oh, okay.
Toronto was the terminus.
What's the Bell building?
Yeah, my question.
I don't know. This one,
Roundhouse. It's a roundhouse.
it might be the roundhouse there. Yeah. The photograph has numbering on it, and I don't have the key to that. I'm sorry.
Looks like a roundhouse.
It might be, and it might be in the right place. This is the Queen's Wharf here again, when it was an actual wharf. This is the Fort York, as you can see, right in here, and There's the Bathurst Street Bridge, right there.
At a different angle.
It's at a different angle, and I'll get to that if I get far enough along today. This is another early depiction of the Queen's Wharf down here again, showing the lighthouse and shipping going by. And yet another of the same idea. There's the Queen's Wharf here. And there was shipbuilding and grain elevators along the waterfront. So this is one stage in the history of the lake filling in the area. This is the old Western Gap here, and that Queen's Wharf. So National Yacht Club would have been right in there. And then this is the new Western Gap here. So for a period, there were actually two Western Gaps going into the harbor. Another thing to notice is the very different amount of land here. These are the sandbars that you could see in that 1813 picture of the battle, right here. To implement their big plans, the Harbour Commission had some smaller dredges, but they built two large ones. This one is called the Cyclone. The other one was called the Typhoon and was not operated here. It went up north on Hudson Bay and ran aground and was abandoned. But this one operated in the harbor and areas for probably about 15 to 20 years and moved vast amounts of earth. Interestingly, this dredge, this is the Cyclone, and obviously coal-fired, working in different parts of the waterfront. It was built at Polson Iron Works. Does the name ring a bell for anybody? Yeah, also built the Quas end. So these are kin. Those two sandbars, as you can see, this is sort of the existing in 1900 landform. And then that new Western Channel, as it was called, was built there between 1908 and 1911, like that. You still had over here the Hanlon's docks, and you had, this was called the Regatta Channel. This is Blockhouse Bay down in here, still called Blockhouse Bay, named after that blockhouse that was on the sandbar back in that early painting. The blockhouse disappeared in the 1820s, but the name exists. A little later, some more lake filling happened there in 1916, and then again in 1938, 37 and 38. So at that point now you have the land shape that actually was used for building the island airport.
Was it done with that intention?
Yes.
So it's all pretty well all landfill then?
Most of the land that the airport sits on is filled, and you can thank that Cyclone dredge among others.
So what was the baseball stadium?
Which baseball stadium?
Was the one where,
Right here.
Babe Ruth hit his first home run?
Right in here. We'll see a picture later and you'll get an idea, but that's where it was, and there was a roller coaster here as well. And a diving horse. You may have seen the picture of the diving horse.
Yeah, there were cottages there too.
The cottages were
And they were sent over to Algonquin.
Yeah, they were built on, they were on this piece of land here. So when you look at this now, what you actually see is that the airport includes those old sandbars. And for that reason, the city of Toronto was a signatory to the airport tripartite agreement, which is maybe a good thing. There's a little bit more filling in that happened in the early 60s, 1961. that added pieces here.
That's temperamental.
Yeah, it seems pieces at both ends, and you can now see the shoreline handlands here and erosion at Gibraltar. This is the current airport configuration, although one of these runways is now decommissioned, north-south runway.
They're working on Gibraltar right now as well.
They are. What they're trying to do is do reinforcing here at the bottom, and then they'll dredge from up there to fill in with the material that actually was eroded in the first place. This is partway along in that 1937 filling in. So you can see the western edge. This is taken from those grain elevators on Bathurst Quay, looking south. And the land has been filled in for the airport, but that channel, the rowing channel down there hasn't been filled in yet.
There's a bridge there.
Yeah, a pedestrian bridge in there. This is another picture showing some of that. And you can also see the cottages that you mentioned in the trees here. Because this treed area was that sandbar. And those were moved very soon after this photograph. Then we get into the inner harbor, where this is early harbor filling. What you can see is quite typical of the time. Rail lines that went right out on the wharves, like that. And then here's a crib work they're going to fill in here. It looks like it may be already partially filled in. And rail lines running everywhere. Because what it really was just offloading and onloading ships to trains. Again, there's the old Union Station there. So this is from about, I think it's John Street looking east. Yeah.
So that housing, they moved them to water out somewhere, did they?
Yes, some of them at least. I don't know the precise history and numbers and so on.
Just to go. Right, something to go.
Yeah, so here's that that pre-lake filling waterfront, although some of it had been filled, but that's the Harbour Commission building still standing. That's on Harbour Street now. Yeah, and in here, you've got some yacht clubs and rowing clubs. Queen City, RCYC, Toronto Canoe Club, Argonaut Rowing Club were here. This is
that Union Station now, that other building?
this big building?
Yes.
No, that's Union over there, the old Union.
Oh, I see, right.
This, I can't remember now. No, it's not the new Union.
It's not the post office, is it? The
Uh,
post office?
I don't know.
I don't see the Royal Yacht.
No, it's not that far.
Yeah,
It's in the next
this,
green block.
I don't know if you were there. This is some of that lake filling that was happening right around where the yacht clubs were on that waterfront. So you're looking north from freshly filled land. And here's a view from the roof of the Harbour Commission building looking sort of south and west. And the yacht clubs in here are really now almost landlocked. And you can see this is the new shoreline forming here. Off in the distance you can see the Western Gap, and in fact you can see the National Yacht Club in the shadow right there.
So the reason for moving it was just depth?
At the channel entrance it was depth, yeah. And then the inner harbor was not deep either. So by dredging it down and using that to fill, they could add land and deepen the harbor, and then 2 for 1. This was the foot of York Street again. You could see in that earlier picture that roadway coming down and splitting like that. This is more lake filling going on. They were a little indiscriminate about what they put into that. It looks
So
a
we're
little-
preserving it, right?
Yeah, there's your old Union Station. This is about where the Air Canada Centre is. Or what's the non-Rogers Centre. Sorry, yes, I got things confused. This is another one of the Harbour Commission dredges, the smaller one. This is, unlike the Cyclone, this is a shovel. The Cyclone was a hydraulic dredge with a big sort of thread chewing up the bottom and pumping it through. There are a number of these sorts of pictures of dredging going on. This is in the central waterfront again. People sometimes look at these pictures and say, what horrible pollution. But that's not pollution, that's just that's just the bottom being drawn up and pumped into a new place. So this is from a hydraulic dredge. And another of the same sort. This is what the water's edge ended up looking like. Not much longer. And I mentioned Polson Ironworks before. Is anybody familiar with this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is.
There is a rumor, and I don't know whether it's true, but you know the RCYC owns the land at the foot of Parliament Street?
Mm-hmm.
They say that's what's under the land.
Well, I can actually show you where it is.
Is it?
Yeah, this is called Knapp's roller boat. The idea was, basically, it's kind of like a floating hamster wheel. With engines, smokestacks at each end, and it was designed to spin and sort of paddle its way along through the water. He had great plans, but this thing was not very successful. It did get out into the lake a few times, but there he is. This was 1897 that the Knapp's roller boat hit the water.
So that whole outside kind of turn?
Yeah, the whole outside turned because it was essentially a floating paddle wheel. Later on, they added a few more fins. I think it gave it some more traction. But I mean, look at the windage, and how would you steer it? Never mind. He was enamored of the idea till the day he died. But there's a whole history of this thing running aground all over the place. Eventually, they gave up on the roller boat idea for it and put basically a bow on it here, and turned it into a barge that they could tow around. This is still sitting on. It's now sitting on bottom outside the Polson Ironworks. And here's another view of it now, sitting on the newly, as the lake is, or the waterfront's being filled in. There's the Harbour Commission building. We're looking west. There's the terminal warehouse. And this is the cannibalized remains of the Knapp's roller boat. Yes.
Is that the Kawasa?
It looks like it. It looks like it. I thought it might be, except it seems to be a little farther to the east than I thought the Kwasind would have been. But I saw it there, and I thought that it looks like Kwasind or Hiawatha.
What year was that?
It'll come back? Yeah, it'll come back. It's not the laser pointer.
Do you know what year that photo was?
That picture? It was about 1926. So you can see the modern shoreline down here. That's today's shoreline. This is the Parliament Street slip right in here. RCYC was leaving from that location for a number of years. This is the old shoreline along here. So Polson Ironworks was on a wharf right here, and the roller boat was here in April 1923, and it probably didn't move after that. And so if you look now, it's essentially under Lakeshore Boulevard right here. This is the Gardner Expressway, Lakeshore Boulevard line right here, near Frederick Street, which is the north-south street in there. And it's still there.
The roller boat is still there,
The roller boat is still there.
underground,
You've driven over it many times.
thousands. I live in that neighborhood, so yeah.
Yeah.
Who
It's a
knew?
lump in Lakeshore Boulevard.
Then we'll get over to the outer harbor where there's another lake filling project going on. This is filling in Ashbridges Bay. And again, dredges. These particular dredges are working on the Keating cut. Yeah, the Keating channel that goes in. So the Don River flows in from the left here, partway up. And this is looking over Ashbridges Bay in here. So this is all fresh lake fill. This was a marsh before that. The original design, and you can see it sort of here, but it didn't remain, was actually a passageway from the inner harbor to Ashbridges Bay through that cut.
Oh, you could go all the way through.
Yeah.
Is that hydraulic dredge?
That's, that one looks like a hydraulic dredge, yeah. They had three, I think, three hydraulic dredges. The two big ones, or the one big one and the two smaller ones. So you can tell it's a hydraulic dredge here, yeah, and there. In both cases, they've got a platform with a big pipe running. So that's taking the dredge 8 up through the pipe, and that's the other one there. These were called THC 2 and 3, I think, imaginatively.
What is it, a vacuum cleaners?
Basically, yeah. Like the kind you would use in an aquarium to suck up the fish droppings. And there you can see actually that cut goes right through into Ashbridges Bay in that shot.
So the Don could go either way.
The Don at that time could have gone either way, yes. This is dredging in the inner harbor, but pouring it out onto the island near where the current RCYC is. Not a very good picture, but. This is Ward's Island, 1911.
That was my fault.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Tent Town.
So this is, yes, as it was tent town on Ward's. And again, this is basically a lake filling project again. Here you can see a couple of dredges operating, building what became Ward's.
So who was living in the tent town?
Paul's father.
Yeah, he did. They used to. There was a group of them that went to a YMCA camp, and they kicked them out when they were 15, and they went and they took over some of those tents. So he told me.
So you can see a hydraulic dredge and a bucket dredge operating here. And here's just a little bit more of that filling in of Ward's. Again, this is very fresh dredge 8. I guess this might be Queen City at the time. No? I don't know what that is.
That's the rescue. Could have been Alexander Yacht Club, but it also was turned into a rescue station.
Okay.
It's almost where the Ward's Island pier, where the ferry comes in.
Yes, that's
It's
why.
somewhat close to it.
Yeah. Okay.
You can see the new fish.
Then we get back over to the Lakeshore Bathurst, Fleet Street area. This was a real boom town. Just does that. This was a real boom town at the time in the 1920s. Oh, does anybody recognize this thing? Where would you find it? You're close. It's just outside the CNE, just outside the Princess Gates to the west, or to the east, in Grange Park. It's a pumping station. It's in the location, if it's not the exact building, of the lunatic asylum pumping station that we saw on that early map. The early map was 1850s, and that's the asylum as it was built in mid-1800s. Pretty impressive, and it was high-tech. They had a big dome at the top, which is actually a water tower. So that pumping station was filling that dome and providing running water into the asylum. They didn't have the sewage system worked out quite as well. Apparently, it accumulated in the basement for a number of years and had to be.
Thanks for sharing that.
They had the labor to get it out of there. It's another story. This is the Cross and Blackwell building that you might not recognize in its skeletal form, but you would recognize in its completed form here at Bathurst and Lakeshore southeast corner. Looking much the same now as it did in 1927.
The air quality is.
Air quality has improved. A lot of these old photographs of the city have just a huge pall of smoke. This is the construction of the Loblaws building on the northeast corner. This is again 1927, I think, yeah. What they're doing is just starting the excavation to build the Loblaws building, and what they're doing is digging up old Queen's Wharf that had been buried like 15 years before. So a pretty fast turnover in there. Obviously in the background you see that the ballpark, Maple Leaf Stadium, was complete. Here's Lakeshore Boulevard, looking spacious, as it was. So now the Loblaws building is completed, the Cross and Blackwell building over here is completed, the stadium is there. This would be about 1928. Right over here on the left, a little hard to see, but worth a peek. That's the bit of the lighthouse keeper's house on Queen's Wharf. It stayed there until 1929, long after the area was turning into something fairly grand. Again, construction here along the, this is the streetcar line that goes over to the CME now, right? And you've got your National Yacht Club in the background there again.
What year was the Tip Top Tailings building built?
I think it was finished in 1930. And again, well,
I don't think it's you.
I think it's got to be something else somewhere else. This shows the Rogers Majestic Radio building, which was built on the northwest corner of Bathurst and Lakeshore. And that's where that condo is now with the soldiers, right? But for a while they were building radios right there, radios of this sort. So there's a genuine Rogers. And they didn't send yeah, the cell plan on this, I don't know. So here's an aerial view. That shows that Rogers right there. Cross and Blackwell here, and the Loblaws here, and then the ballpark, Tip Top, and Stadium Road is right in here. This is looking south, down across from Bathurst over the Lakeshore down towards the harbour. One thing that you can see in this picture is I don't know, right there, that little triangular tower, that's the inner range light for the Western Gap. There's something still there serving the same function. That's sort of a girdwork tower on the inside of the Western Gap, just as you come into the harbour. A little bit more of that intersection, Bathurst and Lakeshore. Then we got a little traffic on Lakeshore Boulevard. This is a little bit later in the 40s. This is the Cross and Blackwell building here, though. And this would be probably war years because the cars don't have license plates on the front.
And no lane markers.
Yeah, it didn't help. Putting them in or not having them seems to be bad either way. Here's a new construction effort on in the area, right here. You might recognize or know what it is.
Brewery.
That's the Molson Brewery under construction, 1954. (1954) was also the founding year for the National Yacht Club Old Timer Sailing Association. And these fellows, Herb Jenkins in the middle here, are standing with the Tip-Top Taylor building in the background here. But also, just peeking over their shoulders here is some of the girder work of that building, the Loveless building, or the Molson building under construction. So you can tell exactly where they are. This is the Gardiner Expressway under construction through this area. They had to sort of reroute the Gardiner Expressway because of Fort York. The original plan was actually to move Fort York, but that ran into opposition. There's the Boomtown Lakeshore, early 60s. This is a little more familiar looking to most of us, I think. Maybe. Older streetcars, the Molson's Brewery. The streetcars obviously have gone through a couple of versions since then. That's the Queen's Wharf Lighthouse. Inauthentically painted. It was not actually white and red. It was all kind of an ochre color. And then we have the Bathurst Street Bridge, just up the road. This is an expansion proposal that didn't happen. This was an idea to put a rail line down right through the middle of Fort York.